a swathe of very strong winds into western areas of France, where I think gusts could reach around about 100, 120 kilometres an hour. There will be rain falling extensively, but a snow potentially as well up over the highest ground in Belgium, Luxembourg and Germany. Friday across Africa will bring cool weather to the northwest, but some high temperatures still across parts of Libya and Egypt, although tending to ease away a little bit over the next few days. Also, we'll start to see some slightly fresher air extending in across the Middle East. So for parts of Syria, Jordan, temperatures dropping compared with recent days. Showers and thunderstorms becoming more extensive across Sri Lanka, and probably one or two working into the Maldives as we head through Friday. And again, Kerala and Tamil Nadu seeing further storm activity as well. The southern Philippines look pretty unsettled for the next few days. We've got a trough of low pressure enhancing the rains. 50 to 75 millimetres of rain expected here, perhaps a little bit more than that in one or two areas. Again, the potential for seeing some localised flooding. Heavy rains continue to affect parts of New South Wales and Victoria. Thursday and Friday rainfall totals adding up to around 50 to 100, maybe 150 millimetres of rain, bringing the threat of some localised flooding, but it's largely dry and sunny in New Zealand.
Hello, I'm Kasia Madeira. This is Outside Source.
Afraid we would all be shot in that gym. I was scared for.
We begin our programme with a special report from Ukraine. The BBC has found evidence of Russian troops using citizens as human shields in villages north of the capital, Kyiv. Families living there told how they were rounded up at gunpoint and forced to gather in a local school as protection for Russian forces against Ukrainian counter-attacks. Well, our correspondent Jeremy Bowen has been among the first journalists to reach villages surrounding Ivano-Kyiv. And I have to warn you that his report does contain details that you may find distressing.
Deep in the forest, large areas are hard to reach as bridges are down and roads blocked by mines. On the edge of the exclusion zone around the site of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster is a village called Termahivka. An elderly couple live in the ruins of their house, badly damaged in an attack on a Ukrainian tank.
Ivan, what happened to your house?
What happened, he said? It just collapsed. Ivan confirmed he'd seen the prisoners. His wife Anastasia said they'd had dreams when they retired here from Kyiv. She was badly hurt in the attack. The Russians would not let a doctor visit her.
Nobody could get out through the happened to a priest.
Ukrainian soldiers and others said the Russians had used civilians as human shields in the next village of Bukovici. It's a small place on a lake. The Russians tried unsuccessfully to blow up the by the Russian occupation, and by the 24 hours when they were held as human shields at the village school. Ivan said it was chaos. Children were crying, everyone was crying.
How would you describe the experience?
Vandals, fascists.
What happened that day?
They were getting bombarded, that's what, said Ludmila. She said at night the Russians forced them out of cellars where they'd been sheltering, pointing their machine guns. They broke open the doors if people didn't answer them.
On the 14th of March, there was here, and at gunpoint marched, estimates vary, 100 to 150 people of all ages, old people, children as well, and they put them in that school and they held them as human shields.
Maria Bilohovost said she survived the Second World War. They were like the Germans, except they spoke Russian, so I knew what they were saying. We were invited into the house. Maria, the great-grandmother, was left behind, terrified about the rest of the family, who were held in the freezing cold school gymnasium. Marina.
And a very difficult report there from Jeremy Bowen. How are people coping in Ukraine when they're hearing about that kind of evidence?
It's tough, Kasia, it's tough. And they're struggling to hear stories like that because that was just one story among millions that are happening right now in Ukraine. And as people are moving west as well, as they get closer to this city of Lviv, people who are fleeing so many areas now, those stories are replicated. Stories of children witnessing unimaginable horrors, stories of men and women who are losing their family members, losing their partners. These stories are just stacking up and up and up. And as you heard in Jeremy's report there, it is very, very hard for people here in the places they love, the places they maybe studied, went to on holiday, the place where their families and friends live. And as these stories continue to come out, and as these terrible pictures continue to come out as well, I think around the collective Ukrainian consciousness, there is a lot of difficulty in actually dealing with that, with everything.
Moved from the east of the country through Lviv into Poland. I guess, are you still seeing a lot of people coming from the east of the country to the relative safety of Lviv and then onwards into the rest of Europe?
It still has who are trying to deal with all of this and who in some cases are staying here in Ukraine and trying to make a new life in a different part of the country. But in some cases they are still crossing the border and looking for a place of safety and looking to really try and rebuild their lives. And I think families want to try and find some kind of a future for their children.
Yes, desperately difficult decisions to be made by families in those areas. Anna, as always, thank you so much to you and your team. Anna Foster there, my colleague, reporting live from Lviv. Well, we know that NATO foreign ministers have been gathering in Brussels. They arrived just a few hours ago, kicking off 2 days of talks on how to support. The Alliance's Secretary General gave this update a little earlier.
We have all seen the atrocities that have been The true nature of President Putin's war. Any targeting and killing of civilians is a war crime, and therefore NATO allies are supporting the international efforts to establish all the facts.
Well, the atrocities in Bucha and Borodyanka. There have been disturbing reports of civilian killings emerging from both. We'll have a closer look at the specific claims being made in a moment. But first, President Biden has been addressing in the last hour. Let's hear what he said.
A sense of brutality and humanity left for all the world to see unapologetically. There's nothing less happening than major war crimes. Responsible nations have to come together to hold these perpetrators accountable.
So President Biden, though, just speaking just a short time ago, and this is what we know. Trapping civilians beneath the rubble. There have been reports that Russian troops fired at those who attempted to dig them out. Now, we still don't have a full picture of what took place there, but Ukraine's Prosecutor General said that the worst situation with civilian victims is in Borodyanka. Authorities also say that they found 5 bodies with their hands tied in what they called a torture chamber. That was also in Bucha. Well, the town's mayor has been speaking to the BBC through an interpreter about what he witnessed, and I do have to warn you that you may find what you're about to hear distressing.
There were 3 civilian cars which were trying to evacuate themselves towards Kiev or Zhytomyr, and they were brutally shot. There was a pregnant woman. Her husband was screaming, asking not to shoot her, but they just brutally shot her. So he had to bury her. The major feeling is hatred, but also a feeling of helplessness, because you can't help those people.
The mayor of Bucha speaking there through a translator. Well, this is the response for the Russian Foreign Ministry.
It is obvious that this terrible, criminal, fake scenario was fabricated to justify another pre-prepared package of sanctions, including a large-scale expulsion of Russian diplomats from a number of Western countries, and of course, in order to complicate, if not completely interrupt, the negotiations at which Kyiv began to show signs of a realistic approach.
Which were echoed by the UK Prime Minister.
When you look at what's happening in Bucha, the revelations that we're seeing from what Putin has done in Ukraine, which doesn't look far short of genocide to me, it is no wonder that people are responding in the way.
A ban on all new investment in Russia. Russia's largest private bank, Alfa Bank, and its largest financial institution, Sberbank, will be both hit by sanctions as well. And we'll also see sanctions on Russian government officials. But there's division within the EU on that. Hungary's President Viktor Orban was re-elected on Sunday, and he previously had one of the closest relationships within the EU to Russia's President Putin. And today he said that he opposed an EU embargo on Russian energy imports. Russia has demanded that the EU members pay for their gas in rubles. And here's Mr. Orban's response to that.
It wouldn't be a problem for us to pay in rubles if that's what the Russians want.
Well, Mr. Orban was also asked about the dead bodies of dozens of civilians found in the town of Bucha near the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, and here's his response to that.
I believe all the atrocities citizens, and any atrocities have to be firmly condemned, and all these cases must be investigated by impartial parties.
So Viktor Orbán there. Now, central to all of this is the Donbass region, specifically two areas, that of Donetsk and Luhansk. And they're in the east of the country. And in recent people there are trying to escape from the region ahead of that expected Russian offensive. These images are from the city of Kramatorsk. Now, we also know that shelling of towns in the region has been continuing. In one town, 10 apartment buildings are said to be ablaze after being hit. And here's the governor.
Situation happening now in Mariupol. I shall explain. The Russian army is getting ready to report to that criminal, Putin, that they have fully captured the Luhansk region, and they will stop at nothing. They cannot break through our resistance. Stone is left after the shelling.
So the reaction there from Luhansk. We just got some breaking news to bring you in terms of another delegation travelling to Kyiv. We're hearing that the Slovak Prime Minister, joined by Ursula von der Leyen, will be travelling to Kyiv. So the head of the European Commission, the two of them will be meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky. This will follow that delegation of the Czech Prime Minister, the Slovenian Prime Minister, and also the Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, who they had travelled by train to meet Volodymyr. Joined by the European Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission. They will be travelling to Kyiv, apparently on what these particular sanctions are doing.
Yeah, exactly. So I think one of the main aspects is that it is a big symbolic move by the US to sanction Putin's daughters, but also a US senior official has said that they're trying to, they believe that Putin is hiding his financial assets with his family. So it could also actually target Putin's wallet directly, and that's certainly what they're trying to do. Whether that is now efficient or not, that remains to be seen, of course. Always there's a difference between sanctioning someone and then also implementing the sanctions. So you have to trace those assets. You have to figure out which assets they own, where those bank accounts are. So merely putting someone on the list is not enough. And at the same time, the UK has also announced a new round of sanctions today on targeting Russian banks, which aims to cripple the financial sector. Impact remains to be seen, but it's certainly a big symbolic step at this moment.
So a symbolic step in terms of the sanctions, but when it comes to the balancing act of the support from the EU to Ukraine, the EU's policy chief, Josep Borrell, pointing out a statistic that is really difficult to believe. Fund Ukraine's defense of its territory. At the same time, the EU has given Russia 35 billion euros in payment for energy. How does the EU balance that?
Yeah, that is certainly a point of criticism in Brussels. Parliament, a conservative group, their chief Manfred Weber criticized the EU for exactly that, saying the EU has to step up its game. At the same time, there is this question here of who is actually targeted by those sanctions. If we hurt Putin, if we target oil, can he not sell this oil to Asian countries, for example, at a better price? So there is some hesitancy here in Brussels, and Germany has been particularly at the forefront of this criticism, essentially, with people pointing fingers at it. But it's certainly not just Germany, but also other countries that are dependent on Russian gas, that are very hesitant to cut this gas supply, essentially. So the EU is a bit in a conundrum of how far can it go in terms of sanctioning Russia, not providing any.
Well, Ed Sheeran's Shape of You was the UK's best-selling song of 2017 and is Spotify's most streamed ever. After the ruling, Ed Sheeran posted a video on his Instagram account. Here's what he said.
Whilst we're obviously happy with the result, I feel like claims like this are way too common now and have become a culture where a claim is made with the idea that a settlement will be cheaper than taking it to court, even if there's no base for the claim. It's really damaging to the songwriting industry.
Well, Mr. Shockley's lawyers had called Ed Sheeran a they'd have been treated in a very different way. Ed Sheeran, on his part, denied this and pointed out that he always credits lesser-known artists if he uses parts of their songs. Well, Kate Swain is head of intellectual property at Gowling law firm, and here's her analysis.
I mean, there's certainly been an uptick. We've certainly seen quite a lot of high-profile copyright infringement allegations. In the US, there was the case against Katy Perry. So there has definitely been an uptick in recent times. It is actually pretty difficult, and I don't think this result is altogether surprising. So first of all, you've got to prove that there has been an act of copying, that somebody has actually taken that work. And here, I mean, they just didn't succeed in doing that. It was very much speculative as to what must have happened rather than what did happen. They've then got to have taken a substantial part or the whole of the work. And this case didn't meet that criteria either. So the judge commented that there were significant differences, and just some similarities isn't enough. It may be a starting point, but it's not going to get you home. And I think the final thing that makes it very difficult, and was demonstrated again in this case, is where the defendants, the actual creators, can demonstrate their own independent narrative as to how they created the work, which was the case here. All of that makes it extremely difficult to get home on a copyright infringement case like this.
Lawyer Kate Swain there. I'll be back in just the next few minutes, so don't go away. Thanks for watching.
Hello there, let's take a look at the satellite picture out in the Atlantic. We're looking at an area of cloud that's going to develop by some strong gusts of wind. 60 to 80 kilometres an hour gusts are in the forecast, so very windy conditions for Thursday. The southeast of Europe, meanwhile, will have a mixture of sunshine and showers, but many of those showers will turn heavy and thundery through the day. Some drier weather for central and southern Italy, central and southern parts of both Spain and Portugal. The north of Spain and Portugal, though, seeing some thicker cloud and a threat of some rain. Now, to the north of our squally weather front, the air's still cold. We've got some snow showers in the forecast for Norway, Sweden and for Finland as well. Here's the forecast for Friday. Another area of low pressure moving in across western France. This one bringing some very strong winds into western areas. Could get gusts of wind of about 100 to 120 kilometres an hour, and there'll be some heavy rain around as well. Perhaps some snow developing across some of the higher parts of Belgium, Luxembourg and into parts of Germany as well. So rain clearing Paris, it then becomes sunnier and a little bit warmer as we head into the weekend. Athens staying fine, temperatures low to mid-20s. That's your weather.
We start at Wimbledon.
Stand by for a moment of history.
The headlines keep breaking.
The Winter Olympics.
Now to cricket.
The Tour de France.
The Africa Cup of Nations.
The debate keeps raging.
They're still the team to beat.
England's batting is weak.
It's going quite well.
Definitely a lot of disappointment.
The results keep coming.
What was going through your mind?
It was absolutely amazing.
My heart rate was up. It's part of the game.
This is a really tasty tie.
It's one of a kind.
This is Sport Today.
For all the latest results, headlines and analysis, Sport Today on BBC World News.
I'm Katrin Nye, an investigative journalist. A year ago, I found out about a glamorous design agency.
It seemed like the perfect job.
Loads of good clients, like big brands like Facebook, Samsung.
Dozens of people from all over the world work there.
You hear about startups that explode all the time and all these people who are billionaires because of it.
I didn't meet anyone in person. The whole thing was just online.
That's when alarm bells started ringing.
The problem is, it's a fake design agency. It's not there.
The email had the evidence of how we've never worked with Samsung or Facebook. Everything's just basically fake.
No one in my organization has any idea who these people are.
And we've been trying to uncover just why anyone would do this.
I'm definitely not a graphic designer. I'm a health and safety consultant.
You shattered people's dreams. You shattered my dream.
You didn't create any opportunities for anyone.
Belarusian side, migrants started throwing rocks and bricks and branches towards the Polish forces.
A week of commemorative events in honor of Archbishop Tutu is well underway all over South Africa.
There's more trouble here in the Netherlands. Small groups of people destroying things in the northern city of Groningen.
The clashes are taking place just a few hundred meters away from where I'm standing now. You can hear the sound of shooting and explosions.
This is a storm that has now claimed at least 14 lives overnight. You had people rushing to their basements.
We break stories from more places than any other international news broadcaster. We are the leaders in global breaking news.
States. 25 women and girls say that they were raped by Russian forces in Bucha. A senior Ukrainian official tells the BBC. We'll be looking at what rape as a weapon of war means. Meanwhile, the government urges people to flee southern and eastern Ukraine if they can, warning that Russia will intensify attacks there. Also coming up on the programme, millions of British people start paying more tax from today as national insurance rises. The government says the money will be spent on health and social care. The Ukrainian government has urged residents in the east of the country to flee while they still can, as Russian forces continue to shell towns and cities there. Meanwhile, an estimated 130,000 people remain trapped in the southern port city of Mariupol in appalling conditions. Ukrainian authorities say they're trying to evacuate civilians through humanitarian corridors, but with limited success. Well, our correspondent Tom Bateman reports now from the city of Zaporizhia, north of Mariupol. He's been speaking to some of those who've managed to escape the fighting.
Some of the people arriving here didn't know if their country still existed. These are the survivors of Europe's biggest humanitarian crisis in a generation. They've had no contact with the outside world for weeks. And they faced the choice of a journey through the front line or starvation and siege at home. The Russians claim they came to liberate us, Anna tells me. Mariupol has become a graveyard, and all the neighborhoods are covered with the graves of civilians. The airstrikes were the scariest, Nina tells me. They are constantly shelling. One of their strikes killed 7 people, 2 of them children. The craters in the ground were 7 meters deep. It was terrifying, she says. Yulia, with her 2 girls, survived in a basement for 5 weeks. Their grandmother, Tatiana, tried to ration the only food they had and says they drank dirty water from a well.
People are having mental breakdowns. There's a woman we know who hanged herself.
People are being buried in the streets. Shallow graves, half a metre deep at best, with some earth on top. Dead bodies all over the city.
For every person on these buses as they arrive, there are thousands more still under Russian siege, under bombardment, cut off from the outside world.
Ukraine has said at least 5,000 dead have been counted in Mariupol. Today, local officials said the true number could be more than double that. But these are the pictures Moscow wants the world to see, filmed by reporters whose access is tightly controlled. Russian aid is being handed out. Survivors from elsewhere in the south are living 2 families per room. Ludmar's children say the tanks and artillery arrived next to their home. They tell me they hid in the basement. What did you feel like? Was it frightening? Yes, they say. As the war moves to the east, Ukrainians don't know how long their lines will keep holding, and they want more heavy weapons. They fear today's reunions could be short-lived. Tom Bateman, BBC News, Zaporizhia, in eastern Ukraine.
We're going to focus on another war crime that is allegedly being carried out in Ukraine. Ukrainian authorities have reported the sexual assault of women by Russian forces since Russia invaded. Lyudmila Denisova, the Ukrainian Parliament's Human Rights Commissioner, has been speaking to survivors from Bucha and also other areas in Ukraine which were previously under Russian control. And this is what she told the BBC. And before we play what she said, I've just got to warn you that her descriptions are graphic.
The new weapon is raping women. We have a hotline phone, 24-hour free hotline, and we created a group providing psychological support. And women have been calling that were held in Bucha together. There were 25 women aged 14 to 24 that were raped by Russian soldiers. 9 of them already died. That was also happening for a month. So these crimes will be investigated and every criminal will be punished.
So Lyudmila Denisova there saying that 25 women and girls were raped by Russian forces in Bucha, and as you heard, 9 of those women and girls have since died. And there are more accounts. A Ukrainian woman from a village near Kyiv told her story to The Times. She said that Russian soldiers invaded her home, stole from her and her family, and then shot dead her husband before raping her repeatedly over the course of several hours. Ukraine has been tweeting about this, saying that rape is a weapon of war, though we don't know yet the full extent of its use in Ukraine. They say that already it's clear that it was part of Russia's arsenal, women being raped in front of their kids, girls in front of their families, as a deliberate act of subjugation. Well, this professor of gender who studies rape in war explains more.
The idea of rape as a weapon of war really refers to a practice of raping women for the purpose of destroying a community, no? So the idea that in patriarchal societies, women are often seen as the property of men, and women's sexuality is then often tied to communities or a family's honor. So when you rape women, you not only destroy the women, but you destroy the men and the community, which makes it so-called effective as a weapon. And because sexual violence is so very intimate and tied to reproduction, of course, it can be very harmful to communities' self-perception, creating fragmentation, shame, very long-term feelings of disconcern.
So, rape is used as a weapon. It's used to terrorize the population. It's used to break up families and destroy communities. And in some instances, to change the ethnic makeup of the next generation. And we saw that during the Rwandan genocide. Rape was used systematically during that conflict. It was even ordered from above. Now, it's not clear what's happening in Ukraine now, but this is one view from there, reported by Christina Lamb in the Sunday Times. A Ukrainian who is setting up a treatment centre described to me as a wave, saying that again.
I think that there's plenty of evidence in wars around the world that there's feelings of entitlement and opportunity among combatants. This is then further encouraged by the idea that women in the enemy camp are available to be raped. They're dehumanized after all. They can be killed, they can be raped. And a military culture which this encourages such sexualized violence. There's very little evidence in previous wars that there are actually instructions, or at least those are not, you can't really find them. But at the same time, while superiors may not order soldiers to rape, they won't discourage it either.
So that's an idea of what is happening. We're now going to take a look at what's being done to stop this. Well, the world began to take action after systematic rape during the Bosnian War. The UN said that sexual violence in conflict needs to be treated as the war crime that it is. It can no longer be treated as an unfortunate collateral damage of war. So rape was recognised as a war crime in 2008, but the International Criminal Court has only secured one conviction for war rape. The International Criminal Court says that they will open investigations into reported sexual violence in Ukraine. But will there be any convictions? Well, the independent organisation working to prevent wars, the International Crisis Group, is sending a team to gather evidence. And Azadeh Moaveni, who is the group's director of the Gender and Conflict Project, is on her way to Ukraine. So talk us through, you must have been hearing about incidences of rape in order to decide to actually go to investigate, to collect evidence. Just talk us through, Azadeh, what you've been hearing.
Thank you, Kasia. Yes, indeed. I think it's quite clear from what your previous guests and the Ukrainian Human Rights Commissioner has said that really the incidence of rape in Ukraine is much higher than the evidence we've collected so far. I think by all indications, we're just at the tip of the iceberg. We have certainly heard in Bucha in particular, that was under Russian occupation for 3 weeks. We have heard of a case of a young woman who was raped there. She survived. She was only raped once, but she had accounts during that period of time of others in her community in the same sort of deeply traumatic and violent way that was described earlier as well, in front of their parents, in front of children, in that sort of community destroying, morale destroying way. And when it was possible for Bucha to be evacuated, that a number of those women were able to leave and to be evacuated. But this case that we know about, she also reported to us that there were other quite young girls, in their teens, very brutally raped. She reported that some of them, she passed along that some of them had lost their teeth. And so it seems like what transpired in that period of time was particularly brutal. And I think we're just going to have to collect evidence and collect testimony in as sensitive as way as possible, and see what evidence can be gathered together.
It is, of course, an immensely sensitive subject, but I wonder if you have any understanding of what the thinking behind it is. Are these acts that are happening by rogue soldiers, by rogue people? Of course, difficult to confirm anything at the moment. Or is this something that is being dictated from further above, from a chain of command, so to speak? I wonder if you have any indication of why this is happening so systematically.
Well, I don't know, Kasia, whether we know how systematic it is yet at this point. There seems to have been particular episodes in particular places where the incidences have been more visible. But what is really clear is that Ukrainian morale has been extraordinarily high throughout this war. And I think that has been, finding a way to crush that, through this deliberate tearing of the community emotional fabric of towns, of families. This is a way to, I think, in a very asymmetric, cynical way, for the Russian side to, if it is indeed, it could perhaps be a tactic rather than a strategy, but to try and, diminish and destroy that morale.
I spoke about rape being recognised as a war crime in 2008, and yet it's very difficult to understand that the International Criminal Court has only secured one conviction for war rape. I guess, how does that then impact you when you are collating all
robustly and effectively? But I think there is also a great deal of potential healing for survivors of rape through the process of reporting, through the process of meeting others who've been through a similar experience. And there are often, as well, transitional justice sort of locally based initiatives that bring families of perpetrators together with survivors. So even though sort of at that exalted level of the ICC, it may be impossible or indeed difficult to secure effective convictions that won't be appealed against, there's more local processes through which justice and healing can occur. And I think that is one of the big motivations to collate, to document, and to help, to look ahead at what will have to, what sort of justice will be needed once the fighting stops.
Azadeh Moaveni, who is on your way to the area, to Ukraine, to collate the evidence on behalf of the International Crisis Group. Thank you very much for speaking to us this evening on Outside Source. Thank you. A difficult task that Azadeh will be taking on. Now, if you are in the UK and if you are affected by any of the issues that we've been discussing, of course, very difficult issues, but please do visit this website. It's bbc.co.uk/action line. You can find support there if you're affected by what we've been talking about. Now, we're going to talk about the new divorce law that has come into effect in England and Wales. No-fault divorce. It's the biggest reform to divorce law here in 50 years. So let's have a look at what it is and why it matters. Now, no-fault divorce means that couples who want to divorce quickly don't need to give a reason or blame one person to end their marriage. And that's why the UK government describes it as the end of the blame game in divorce. Around 100,000 UK couples divorce each year, and under the old laws, anyone who wanted to split had to accuse their partner of desertion, adultery, or unreasonable behaviour. If you choose not to blame each other, you have to spend 2 years apart if both partners agree, or 5 years apart if one of the couple objects to the split. And that's caused problems. Here's one family lawyer.
I've had countless times where clients have come to me and have said, we both want to get divorced. We're both happy just to proceed. And they're actually really shocked to be told that actually you need to come up with, a sort of random list of reasons why the other party has behaved unreasonably.
And those old rules created unnecessary conflict for a separating couple and for their children. Well, this woman certainly felt that way.
I felt very uncomfortable with those right from the beginning because they seemed to be very much sort of pointing the finger and that someone was at fault. It felt that that was not going to be useful to the divorce process, especially when young children are involved. I think apportioning blame sort of fuels the flame a little and didn't seem like a great way to set up co-parenting in our future.
Well, lawyers also say that previous laws trapped people in loveless and sometimes abusive marriages.
Some of the domestic abuse charities have reported that often women, not necessarily women, but survivors of abuse have found the old fault-based process very difficult because if a party seeking a divorce doesn't wish to allege fault, they used to have to wait a minimum of 2 years. And for survivors of abuse, the prospect of potentially writing down and having in court papers allegations in relation to that abuse is something they were frightened of causing a reaction and retaliation from the perpetrator of that abuse.
So let's have a little look at what has changed. Well, from today, one or both partners can declare their marriage is over in a statement in a court. Judges will no longer ask for a reason. And the same rules apply to civil partnerships. The aim? Well, the UK Justice Secretary says we want to reduce the acrimony couples endure and end the anguish that children suffer. But the law doesn't take into account disagreements over money and finances. Let's hear from Kate Daly, now co-founder of Amicable. It's a divorce service that helps families.
This will help people do the divorce part. When you get divorced, there are 3 elements to getting divorced. There's sorting out the legal paperwork, there's sorting out the finances and sorting out the children. I think this will allow more people to sort out just the divorce element. And for some people who don't have children or don't have finances to navigate or to discuss, that will make it a more straightforward and simple process. But just to pick you up on that, it's never easy. Nobody finds divorce easy, and this isn't making divorce easy. It is making the process less punishing.
Well, in the UK, no-fault divorce already exists in Scotland, but the so-called blame rules still apply in Northern Ireland. So let's look at other countries around the world and what's happening there. Sweden has liberal divorce laws, no-fault divorce since 1973. And divorce in the United States is decided by state law. So California, for example, has no-fault divorce. That first came into effect there under the 1969 under Governor Ronald Reagan. Poland has conservative rules. The existence of grounds for divorce is essential. If not proven in court, it can't happen. The Philippines remains the only UN member state without legal provision for divorce, though religious law does provide for it if you are Muslim. So where does that put the UK? Let's go back to Kate Daly again.
Well, it's been a long time coming here. It's been over 50 years since the last reforms in the divorce laws. So this is a seismic change, and it does catch the UK up with other Western democracies like Canada, like Australia. Australia had no-fault divorce in 1974, and you mentioned Sweden in your intro. So we are well behind the curve. So this is very welcome.
We're staying in the UK. Millions of people here and businesses also are starting to pay more tax from today after the national insurance rise came into effect. The government says that the rise of 1.25 pence in the pound will be spent on health and social care. The Prime Minister saying that the increase was unquestionably the right thing to do and showed that the government is prepared to take the big decisions for the country. Labour, however, calling it the wrong tax at the wrong time, adding that the NHS was unlikely to see much.
Insurance bill too.
it is only a small increase, but every increase at the moment is, it's massive for a small business when we're seeing all the other increases.
They don't feel they can up the price of the flowers as customers are struggling too. And for many, flowers are a luxury.
Every penny counts, doesn't it, really?
With fuel prices already so high, Richard thinks this tax rise is unfair.
How much more of a pound do they want? Rishi Sunak will say it's a small increase and stuff like that. Them small increases are coupled along with them huge increases with all that. It's just not sustainable.
It's not just businesses who'll be paying more, lots of employees will too. For the next few months, you'll have just under £10,000 of your wages tax-free. And then instead of paying 12% national insurance, you'll have to top up to 13.25% and more for higher earners. But after facing criticism, the government have tried to soften the blow. So from July, the amount that you can earn before you pay tax will increase to £12,500. And then you'll be charged that higher 13.2% rate for national insurance. The government say that most employees will actually end up paying less in national insurance after all of these changes. But for those that are going to be paying more, it's an extra pressure. Visiting a hospital in Hertfordshire, the Prime Minister says he knows people are struggling.
We're abating that, we're helping people, but what we're doing today is unquestionably the right thing for our country. It's the right thing for the NHS.
In Lancashire, the Labour leader said this wasn't the right way to fund the NHS.
We've had 15 tax rises, if you can believe it, from this Chancellor. So we've now got the highest rate of taxation for 70 years.
Sue works for herself, giving expert training to childminders and nurseries. She'll have to pay national insurance on her profits this coming tax year.
Based upon the income in the last 12 months, yes, it would be quite a significant increase for me. But this next 12 months, who knows in terms of actually how much income I'm going to be getting.
Today's increase comes at a moment where lots of businesses and workers already feel they're running dry. Coletta Smith, BBC News in Cleckheaton.
Now we're going to go to China. Its economic capital, Shanghai, has a population of 25 million people, and it's currently in a citywide COVID lockdown, which has now been extended into its second week, with residents under very strict orders to stay at home. Well, across China, more than 20,000 COVID-19 cases were reported on Wednesday. It's the highest daily total since the pandemic began. Beijing has previously managed to keep the country's case rates low with its zero-tolerance strategy towards COVID. It's now, however, struggling to control the outbreak. Over 16,000 of those cases were found in Shanghai, where a new round of mass testing is underway. One of the most controversial of Shanghai's policies has been separating COVID-positive children from their parents, which has triggered widespread anger across the country. That rule has now been relaxed, allowing parents who are also positive to stay with their kids. Don't go away. I'll be back very, very soon here on Outside Source.
Wherever you go in the world, one airline goes further to make it feel exceptional. Qatar Airways, going places together.
We'll be landing shortly in South Africa.
This new coronavirus in early 2020. This has been such a fast-moving story and was relentless. The NHS is now on the brink. There's been a wealth of information, and it's my role as medical editor to put that clearly and succinctly for the audience. It is hard to overstate just how important this vaccine could be. It was a privilege to be able to film the very first volunteers to receive one of the vaccines during the trials. It is science we have to thank for giving us this route out of the pandemic. Coronavirus is going to be with us for years to come. We're going to have to learn to live with it, but will not see our lives dominated by it.
Hello, welcome. I'm Kasia Madeira. This is Outside Source. The BBC finds evidence of Russian troops using citizens as human shields near Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Survivors share their stories.
I was afraid we would all be shot in that gym. I was scared for my daughter. I don't have the words.
25 women and girls say that they were raped by Russian forces in Bucha, according to a senior Ukrainian officials who told the BBC. We'll be taking a look at what rape as a weapon of war actually means. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian government is urging people to flee southern and eastern Ukraine if they can, warning that Russia will intensify attacks there. Also coming up on the programme, millions of British people start paying more tax from today as national insurance rises. The government says the money will be spent on health and social care. And Ed Sheeran wins a High Court battle after he was accused of ripping off another artist's song. We begin our programme with a special report from Ukraine. The BBC has capital Kyiv. Families living there told how they were rounded up at gunpoint and forced to gather in a local school as protection for Russian forces against Ukrainian counter-attacks. Well, our correspondent Jeremy Bowen has been the first of journalists to reach villages surrounding Ivankiv, and I have to warn you that his report contains details that you may find distressing.
Deep in the forest, towards the border with Belarus, Ukrainian forces were securing the territory the Russians have left. Large areas are hard to reach as bridges are down and roads blocked by mines. On the edge of the exclusion zone around the site of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster is a village called Termahivka.
Really swampy ground.
Everyone wanted to talk about the Russians. Bogdan showed a place where Russian soldiers made him dig a shallow grave to bury a man they'd killed.
And they had to sleep under these rags?
He said that with 4 other young men, he was held as a prisoner for 15 days in the open, often bound and blindfolded, threatened with fake executions, then one shot him in the leg.
He put me on the bench, aimed his machine gun at me and shot my knee. It's because my younger brother was in the army. They found his military cap and photos.
Down the road, an elderly couple live in the ruins of their house, badly damaged in an attack on a Ukrainian tank.
Ivan, what happened to your house?
What happened, he said? It just collapsed. Ivan confirmed he'd seen the prisoners. His wife Anastasia said they'd had dreams when they retired here from Kyiv. She was badly hurt in the attack. The Russians would not let a doctor visit her.
Nobody could get out through the village.
I heard a doctor was shot by the Russians when she was trying to get to a patient. The same thing happened to a priest.
Ukrainian soldiers and others said the Russians had used civilians as human shields in the next village of Bukovici. It's a small place on a lake. The Russians tried unsuccessfully to blow up the dam before they left. The people of Bukovici are still traumatized by the Russian occupation and by the 24 hours when they were held as human shields at the village school. Ivan said it was chaos. Children were crying, everyone was crying.
How would you describe the experience?
Vandals, fascists. I don't want to think about the Russians. They're not people.
What happened that day?
They were getting bombarded, that's what, said Ludmila. She said at night the Russians forced them out of cellars where they'd been sheltering, pointing their machine guns. They broke open the doors if people didn't answer them.
On the 14th of March, there was heavy fighting in the area. The Ukrainians were on the attack. The Russians were losing men. That night, the Russians went door to door in the streets around here and at gunpoint marched, estimates vary, 100 to 150 people of all ages, old people, children as well, and they put them in that school and they held them as human shields.
Grandmother was left behind, terrified about the rest of the family, who were held in the freezing cold school gymnasium. Marina said her daughter still shows signs of anxiety.
I was afraid we would all be shot in that gym. I was scared for my daughter. I don't have the words. I'm still frightened. Machine guns. A 2-year-old girl should not see this. I'm sorry. I'm going to cry.
Ukrainian tanks are moving through these forests. The question is how the Russians are treating civilians in the places which they still occupy. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Ivankiv.
Well, a little earlier I heard from our correspondent in Lviv, Anna Foster.
It's tough, Kasia, it's tough, and they're struggling to hear stories like that because that was just one story among millions that are happening right now in Ukraine. And as people are moving west as well, as they get closer to this city of Lviv, people who are fleeing so many areas now, those stories are replicated, stories of children witnessing unimaginable horrors, stories of men and women who are losing their family members, losing their partners. These stories are just stacking up and up and up. And as you heard in Jeremy's report there, it is very, very hard for people here in Ukraine to process that. This is their homeland. These are the places they know, the places they love, the places they maybe studied, went to on holiday, the place where their families and friends live. And as these stories continue to come out, and as these terrible pictures continue to come out as well, I think around the collective Ukrainian consciousness, there is a lot of difficulty in actually dealing with that, with everything else that is happening at the moment during this conflict.
And Anna, I'm hearing a lot about children that are moved from the east of the country through Lviv into Poland. I guess, are you still seeing a lot of people coming from the east of the country to the relative safety of Lviv and then onwards into the rest of Europe?
It's still happening. It's still happening. And actually what is interesting now, if you remember in the early days when you were on the border, Kasia, and people were travelling in huge numbers, is they're coming from those areas that we've heard so much about, places like Kharkiv on the front line of the fighting, places like Mariupol. I spoke yesterday to one family who had been since the very first day of this war, the 24th of February, they had been sheltering in the basement of a school in Kharkiv as it was shelled by Russian forces. And Lisha, the mother, decided that even after 5.5 weeks, that was the moment that she decided to take her children and go and flee and try and get to a place of safety. People are still crossing the border to Poland, where I know you were just last week, and the children that you met at the school, that is so important. I think the help that is being given to the children now who are trying to deal with all of this, and who in some cases are staying here in Ukraine and trying to make a new life in a different part of the country. And rebuild their lives, and I think families want to try and find some kind of future for their children.
Anna Foster there, my colleague, reporting from Lviv with an overview of what's happening, the continuing movement, displacement of people across Ukraine. Now, we know that NATO foreign ministers have been gathering in Brussels. They arrived just a few hours ago, kicking off 2 days of talks on how to support Ukraine at this stage of the Russian invasion. Jens Stoltenberg, the alliance's Secretary General, gave this update.
We have all seen the of civilians is a war crime, and therefore NATO allies are supporting the international efforts to establish all the facts.
Well, the atrocities that Jens Stoltenberg was referring to there happened in towns near Kiev, specifically in Bucha and Borodyanka. There have been disturbing reports of civilian killings emerging from both, and we will take a closer look at the claims being made in just a moment. But first, President Biden has been speaking in just the last few hours.
A sense of brutality and inhumanity left for all the world to see unapologetically. There's nothing less happening than major war crimes. Responsible nations have to come together to hold these perpetrators accountable.
So President Biden there, and here is what we know about the allegations so far. Now, we know that blocks of flats were bombed in Borodyanka, trapping civilians beneath the rubble. There have been reports that Russian troops fired at those who were trying to dig those out. Now, we still don't have a full picture of what took place there, but Ukraine's prosecutor general said that the worst situation with civilian victims is in Borodyanka. Meanwhile, in Bucha, mass graves reportedly containing hundreds of bodies were discovered. This is a satellite image which is allegedly showing one such of those mass graves. Authorities also saying that they found 5 bodies with their hands tied in what they describe as a torture chamber. That was also in Bucha. And the town's mayor has been speaking to the BBC through an interpreter about what he witnessed. And once again, a warning, you may find what he said distressing.
There were 3 civilian cars which were trying to evacuate themselves towards Kiev or Zhytomyr, and they were brutally shot. There was a pregnant woman. Her husband was screaming, asking not to shoot her, but they just brutally shot her. So he had to bury her on the side road, and instead of the cross, to put the number plate of his car. The major feeling is hatred, but also a feeling of helplessness, because you can't help those people.
The words of the mayor of Bucha translated there. Well, let's hear the response from the Russian Foreign Ministry.
It is obvious that this terrible, criminal, fake scenario was fabricated to justify another pre-prepared package of sanctions, including a large-scale expulsion of Russian diplomats from a number of Western countries, and of course, in order to complicate, if not completely interrupt, the negotiations at which Kyiv began to show signs of a realistic approach.
So a response from the Russian officials there. And in the past few hours, we've been seeing the US announce sanctions on Russia. So let's go through what we know about those sanctions. They include a ban on all new investment in Russia, Russia's largest private bank, Alfa Bank, and also its largest financial institution, Sberbank, will both be